Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the Season 4 finale of Link's Awakening. And of course, joining me always with these finale episodes, we got my buddy Corey Richmond. Hey, Corey.
Hello. I'm here again.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Again, a lot of people, you don't know this. We're going to reveal a behind-the-scenes secret, but we started recording this, and now we're doing it again because we had some technical difficulties. So this is literally again.
This is take 2, so you guys you'll never hear the lost Turtle Rock episode.
There might be some lost takes. Who knows?
Oh,
you know,
true.
You never know what comes up. But you know what? We refreshed. We've revamped our tanks, our take tanks, and we're here to wrap up Turtle Rock. And we're also gonna be wrapping up Link's Awakening, but we're just stopping with Turtle Rock, and then we'll talk about the rest of the game because we sort of decided the Windfish's egg, it's not necessarily a dungeon, so we're gonna do more of a focus on Turtle Rock as the final proper dungeon of the game. You know what? Before we get into it, why don't you tell us about how your podcast, the Player Power Podcast, is going?
It's going pretty good. We are actually. By the time this comes up, I'm not sure if I'll have the episode out yet, but we just finished recording our season finale episode, which is basically, it's going to be a dual review of our 2 homework games that we've been playing through the whole season, right, and those 2 are Hollow Knight and Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for that. You can find those basically wherever you listen to podcasts, so just keep an eye out. The Player Power Podcast.
I'm very interested in that. When I've played a little bit of Hollow Knight, but I love it. It made me feel like, oh, this is what, like, I would love a Zelda game kind of in that style.
Oh,
maybe not necessarily, like a Zelda 2 type thing. I would love to see a return to that form, maybe a spin-off or something like that.
Definitely.
But I just had such Zelda feelings playing that, like traversing the world and.
Yeah, I think the way that most Metroidvania worlds unlock, I feel like Zelda is ripe for that kind of exploration, and especially if they ever did like a Zelda 2 remake or spiritual successor or something, I feel like that's definitely the way to go.
100%. So yeah, I'm gonna be looking out for that. I'm pretty. It's a good show, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Turtle Rock. There's not much. I've been kind of going through the story of the game, and there's a nice little kind of I want to say final scene with Marin before you go to Turtle Rock, where you rescue her from a bridge, and we sort of get this like little reveal, not from her. She doesn't really want to tell you, but the owl reveals that she actually sang the Ballad of the Windfish in front of the egg, which, of course would lead to waking the Windfish and the island disappearing. So it's kind of I don't know, there's some intrigue there, and like with Marin's wish to leave the island. So I think this is a nice little, it's a nice little bookend, because Marin, they've kind of inserted her into small little moments throughout the game, and I thought this was a pretty solid moment.
Yeah. Definitely.
We'll just get straight to the dungeon itself, because you really, other than that, it's just some more overworld exploration, and it's pretty cool. I like the lead up to the dungeon. It really actually does feel like, it reminds me a little bit of Death Mountain, or not Death Mountain, the Valley of Death, is it called, in Zelda 2?
Yeah,
where you kind of go through like I sort of was thinking about this, like, oh, it's a bit of a hike, and it's kind of treacherous, it does feel like a big lead up to something,
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And
it's tucked away like right up in the corner too.
Yeah, I actually liked having the last 2 dungeons kind of up in the mountains, like that added kind of a sense of epicness, I guess, to it.
Very perilous.
Yeah, very perilous. But to actually get into the dungeon, this is very cool. The dungeon, I feel like the dungeon entrance itself is a mini boss, and you get this little fight with this alligator looking dude. I think that's pretty unique. I don't think there's anything we talked about in our previous recording, like the Divine Beast, but yeah, there's nothing else really like it.
Yeah, no, not really. Now that I'm thinking about it too, it's probably one of the first examples ever of like an overworld boss. We don't really see that a lot in Zelda in general, but this is probably the first, if not one of the first examples of that. And the fact that it conceptually makes sense, like with the dungeon, like it's not a turtle head, but I feel like if you suspend your disbelief, you can kind of be like, oh, that's the turtle's head or whatever.
It's a big reptilian creature.
Close enough.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of fitting, because then you go in, and I think if you're looking at the layout of the map, it's like its head, or I guess it's maybe the entrance is more like it's. I can't tell if it's supposed to be the head or the tail.
It's either
of the
the head or the
I think
tail.
it's the tail.
They make sense.
I think it's the tail. All right, maybe that doesn't work as well as I thought, but but it's cool. Yeah, there's not many. You know what came to mind actually was like the little mini boss fight in Lake Hylia in Twilight Princess.
Oh yeah,
like that's like the only other like old overworld. There's a couple, but this really has. It's kind of it's a simplistic fight, but it's pretty. I think it's pretty like epic in nature.
Yeah.
Where you're like on top of the mountain battling this giant reptile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you gotta like play the ocarina song to wake him up and revive him. I think that's pretty cool.
Of course. Yeah. Got some good use out of the frog song of the soul for these last two dungeons, so that's cool. It really adds up. Like it really makes it feel like a big step up in the peril, like we talked about. And I think the dungeon itself has this. We were sort of talking when we recorded previously, I guess, about how I felt like the dungeon had a very menacing vibe. Would you agree with that?
It's definitely menacing. It's intimidating, just like in its size alone. But even the theme of it, which I'm sure we'll get into, like this feels like a very dangerous dungeon. Some of the other ones may have just kind of felt like you're inside some structure or some abandoned like labyrinth or something, but you go in here and it's like there's lava everywhere, there's enemies left and right, and it's like this is a dangerous place to be.
This is one of the we haven't had many fire dungeons, right?
No,
like,
I was actually thinking this is probably one of the first true, tried and true fire themed dungeons. I was thinking about it, and you could probably also make that argument for I think it's Three-Eyed Rock Palace or Hidden Palace in Zelda 2, because it's got a lot of lava, and then Barba is the final boss. So like, but even so, like this is definitely, there's no arguing it really. This is definitely meant to be like a fire themed dungeon. Yeah,
it's meant. I think you said it's like volcanic. Like it feels like you're in a volcano, which is kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So it's got that. I think the music, we mentioned the music that goes along with it. Like, I think this game is the first one where every single dungeon has a different theme, which is like an obvious good thing. That's awesome. Mm. And I've really grown to like I've really liked each theme individually. I think they all are kind of unique, while also fitting together really well, and also kind of like upping the tension as the dungeons go on. I feel like the songs get more and more menacing. I would say. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Like, I think of the first couple dungeons, it's like it feels more of like a standard classic. Like it makes me think of the original Legend of Zelda dungeon theme, and then like and I think like Key Cavern is like a little screwball-y, and then Angler's Tunnel is kind of like mysterious and watery. Mm-hmm. But then from then on, it's like Catfish's Maw is aggressive. Face Shrine is like it's deeply unsettling.
Yeah, it's really weird.
It goes spooky to me with the reveal. Yeah, the reveal of the island being a dream.
Yeah.
And then it's like creepy from there on out, and I feel like each one gets progressively like actually scary.
Yeah.
Whereas the other ones I feel like are more like, ooh, it's like a dungeon. It's not actually that scary. But then these are like, by the time you get here, it's like, oh, geez.
Yeah. And we kind of talked about this in the previous recording a little bit, but the remake does a really good job of adding additional instrumentation or maybe slightly remixing the songs in a little way to kind of, and that's the cool thing, is that it's not really overhauling what the original tune was doing. It sometimes just kind of amplifies the tone that it was going for, and that actually helps if you look back at some of the these dungeon themes from the original or from the DX version. After playing the remake, you can be like, oh yeah, that is that thing that they were doing in the remake, that's actually still here.
They're very true to the original while kind of highlighting certain things more. Or even liked, this is outside the dungeon, but I think the best example in the game for me is like the owl theme, how they added, it's always kind of had this like toy boxy, dreamy melody to it, but in the remake they added some like menacing horns underneath that give it definitely like a different tone.
Oh yeah, it's a lot
different
spookier,
sort of feel.
A lot more like mysterious.
Yeah, so I think they've, with almost every song in the game, actually they did a really good job in the remake of kind of just highlighting, like really capturing the mood that they already established very well, I think, on the Game Boy. Okay. So now I guess we can really talk about the navigation, which I know we had a lot to say about this before, because it is, I think, to me, it is the end game of each dungeon in this getting a bit more like bigger and a bit more sprawling and a bit more complex, like Eagles. I think you take Eagles Tower out of it because it's almost like really its own thing, and I think the rest of the dungeons kind of have this very natural like evolution to them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas like
definitely.
This one, it's like the end game of that, where it's like it feels a lot like level 9 from Death Mountain.
Does.
The Legend of Zelda.
It does.
It's just like a big sprawling labyrinth.
It is a lot more. So this is actually something that I did in between recordings, is that I wanted to verify, because I think I made a claim last time that this was the biggest dungeon in the game. So I went based off of, because this is a screen-based game in the originals on the Game Boy versions. So if you count the actual screens, each screen, this is definitely the biggest. It has 46 screens.
Okay.
And then plus 12 if you count the underground passageway screens.
Yeah.
So for reference, the next biggest one is Face Shrine, which has 40 regular screens and then 6 underground screens. So that's a difference of 12 screens total.
Okay.
So this is definitely, far and away the biggest dungeon in this game. And naturally it is in layout, it's more sprawling. But I feel like this actually does a better job of navigating this large area. I feel like the dungeon is segmented really well.
And it actually, in terms of like the progression, I think they keep it relatively linear in like what you have to unlock. Like it's like in the beginning, you can only get 3 keys, and then it's like then there's 3 key blocks if you're kind of following the natural progression.
Well, it's linear, but it gives you choices for how you want to, like when you're in,
at least for how you pick up stuff. Yeah,
you need to go from section A to section B, but before you do that, there are a couple things you can do in whatever order you want in section A. Like even in the second room of the dungeon, you can go up, you can go left, you can go right, and they lead to completely different passageways.
I think it actually really works making that aspect of it more simplistic, and then also having all the extra stuff, because with how big and sprawling it is, like there's still a lot of ways to get really tripped up in this, especially with like one-way doors and all the underground passageways. So I think they really like walk that line like really well in this dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
Right in the beginning, there's just so much you can pick up. Like I think the map and compass and the stone beak are all actually pretty useful for a new player. So like I've always kind of considered them as like even though you wouldn't, if you were like mapping out the progression of the dungeon, you might not necessarily include them. I still think like they're definitely a very useful tool, like especially with the stone beak puzzles, because sometimes I've talked about those as like the solutions they provide, like a key of knowledge. You know what I mean? Similar to a way of like picking up a dungeon item will unlock a part of the dungeon for you. Like, oh, maybe you didn't understand how this works, but now the stone beak has kind of guided you.
Yeah, it is definitely helpful. And I wanna draw a comparison to, two dungeons that come to mind when we talk about like big on the same level as in like there's no different floors, it's all on one floor.
Right.
I sort of think of Face Shrine, and I think of, like you said, level 9. And I think something that big sprawling dungeons tend to be hit or miss for me, depending on how they do the progression. And I think this is one that's a hit for me, because something it does is that early on in the bottom half of the turtle, before you can progress towards like the later half of the dungeon, towards where you get, the boss key and the item and stuff, you have a choice of basically going up towards that central lava room, or you can follow the path left or follow the path right. And the cool thing is that either way, whichever way you go, you get a reward at the end of whatever path. So like if you go left, there's a small key to pick up and there's the compass. If you go right, there's a small key to pick up and there's the stone beak. If you go up, you can find the map and like discover other underground passageways where you have to come to later. So that's something that I like, because I have personally run into situations in, say, a dungeon like Face Shrine or in Palace of Darkness, where it's like I might go all the way down one path and that's required to progress throughout the dungeon, but maybe I went there before I had the small key that I needed to get to continue. You know what I mean? So I feel like the design of this dungeon, you're less prone to have moments of unnecessary backtracking, or what feels like unnecessary backtracking.
And I personally believe the backtracking in this, for me, is rewarding, at least to start to put together my map of the dungeon and like connect where one underground passageway goes to another. Because I could totally see if you miss something and you're like, I see this chest on the map and I gotta like backtrack all the way there. Like if you're going if I go down 2, left 2, like that might take a while. But if you've done your due diligence and you're looking, okay, this staircase connects to here, or I can warp to the entrance and then take this staircase, like to me it's actually rewarding to like really master the dungeon, because I think at almost every section of this dungeon, like once you've kind of cleared it and you have to come back for stuff, it actually is very navigable to get anywhere you need to go if you're like kind of following. It reminds me of aspects in Angler's Tunnel and in Catfish's Maw, where you get the item and then now it's like, okay, like the dungeon, I've been shown the whole dungeon and the dungeon is my oyster, and it's just about like getting back to all those areas you've been. Yeah. And that to me is satisfying.
No, I definitely agree. And I think it is the fact that the places where this dungeon branches off, those branches are relatively linear in nature. So it's not like if you need to go back through one, I don't think it's incredibly likely that you're going to get lost, especially if you have the map and compass. And this is something that I mentioned last time, is that sometimes we refer to some of these dungeons with the metaphor of like being a knot that you have to unpick one by one.
Yeah, I really like this.
And this is kind of like that, but also like you said, it's similar to Angler's Tunnel and Catfish's Maw in the way that the metaphor that I would describe it as is it's almost like climbing up a slide so that you can slide back down. Because especially with like something like Catfish's Maw, where you're progressing throughout the dungeon, you're finding your way, you're hitting a bunch of dead ends, and like you have to complete a bunch of stuff to get to this one point. And once you get to that one point where you get the hook shot, the rest of the dungeon is all downhill from there. You're blazing through obstacles that you couldn't get through before, and a dungeon that might have felt bigger or more difficult to navigate now is like a piece of cake. And I feel like that's definitely the case in this too, because it's like there are a bunch of, and this is actually something, a really cool point that we can talk about later, the amount of mini bosses in this dungeon. But usually your first time through exploring in this dungeon, you're going to have to face a bunch of mini bosses in a row, and you're going to have to learn the layout of the dungeon. After you get to the point where you've explored most of the dungeon, you understand where the passageways go, and you've beaten all the mini-bosses, it does not take you long to get from point A to point B, even if it's relatively far away in the dungeon.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really strong point of it. The mini-bosses, do they come back in the DX version? They might come back.
They do, yeah. Oh, you mean do they come back to life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I think some of them actually do come back even after you defeat them, which I'm not as hot about, but it's whatever. But I think your point still stands there. And again, back to, so there is sort of like, I think they do a good job too of like, while keeping the actual progression like not too complicated, like throwing stuff in there that makes it like that's like, just remember this type of stuff, because like right away in the beginning of the dungeon, you have those rooms where you're blocked off by ice before you can get the nightmare key and also get to the nightmare's chamber. So I think they do a good job of like putting those, they've always done that in this game actually, with like the teases of the boss and the boss key. I think they've always done that really well. There's also like bombable walls that you probably won't know about on your first way through, but then like you can get later in the dungeon and see the cracked wall from the other side. And so they kind of give you a shortcut back to earlier areas in a lot of, I think, kind of key areas. There's a couple. And then also if you're a returning player, you can remember those walls, and they kind of make it so you can save some of your keys, which is an element I always love, is like ending the dungeon with save keys. And there's locked doors you can like there's optional ones, which I think, it's very helpful to use because it'll kind of make another shortcut. But if you're kind of being diligent again with your keys, like you'll also have extra keys there. So like there's definitely like, even though I can always imagine like a sort of path of progression for a new player, I still think there's like, depending on like your style of play, like the way you look at a dungeon, like there's definitely going to be a couple different ways it can go for people.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think that's a really cool element of this dungeon's design, is that there's wiggle room with whichever way you want to go. And that's actually on my recent playthrough, I actually got stuck because of that, because I knew there's a spot where it was a wall that you could bomb. So I bombed it and I jumped through, and then I spent the one key I had, but I didn't realize there was another bombable wall. So like I went back and there's a locked door, and I was like, oh no, what did I do?
Well,
I figured it out eventually, but
yeah. So I think navigationally it really is like you collect 3 keys and then unlock 3 doors, and then collect 3 keys and unlock 3 doors. But again, it can, for whoever you are, it could go a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like you're saying, I finished the dungeon with it was either 1 or 2 extra small keys that I didn't use. And once I hit that point in the dungeon where I was like, I think I can get to where I need to go without unlocking those doors at all, that's just a really satisfying feeling for a player, I think.
Yeah, that anytime I got an extra key in my pocket, I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Yeah. So, okay, there's a lot of little nice little features in here that don't necessarily they just give it kind of a unique feel. we've talked about the crystal switches before, and I think there's a lot of good dungeons in here that have, great use of the crystal switch that they brought from A Link to the Past, which kind of is its own key, its own puzzle in itself. If you look at like the Swamp Palace, that's a good example of it, but a lot of dungeons in here make great use of it. But what I like about this dungeon is, and I think this goes to what I was saying earlier about like keeping certain things simple, is you have one crystal switch and then only one area that it actually raises and lowers the blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is really cool. I think that's just such a power move to be like, so you've got all these keys you collect and pick up too, but then you've got this one spot that has this one key, but you don't take it with you, So if it's kind of annoying if you have to go back, but again, it's one of those things where at that point the dungeon should be fairly navigable to you.
Exactly, yeah. It is kind of cheeky that they just throw it in a room, and up to that point, by the time you see the crystal switch, you have not seen one platform. So you're like, oh geez, do I hit it or do I just leave it here? And I think
right.
I think what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to like hit it once, and then that will lower that barrier after what's his name? Blano's room?
Yes, right.
But something that we were talking about last time as well is that there is a section of this dungeon where you can exit the dungeon, which in itself I think is pretty cool that you can...
That part is really cool.
Yeah. You can exit the dungeon and go down some other stairs in the overworld, which brings you back to a different part of the dungeon. And that's really cool, but that resets the crystal switch, I'm pretty sure. So
it does, and that feels kind of random.
Yeah, so like that's what happened is that I hit the crystal switch, and before I got to Blano's room, I exited the dungeon, came down the other way, got to Blano's room, beat him, and I was like, what the heck? The thing's still up.
That happened to me too, yeah.
So then you have to backtrack, but it shouldn't be that difficult to know where it is or to know how to get back there at that point. I agree.
I guess if you haven't gotten there, like, I guess if you're not like us, you wouldn't be thinking about the status of the switch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'd just be like, oh, I gotta hit this switch. Like, you wouldn't necessarily know that you moved it down. Unless you saw it, then you went back to get it, then you went outside and came back. I can definitely see a scenario where that happens, but...
That'd be a pain.
I guess one thing I like about that is you could theoretically see that crystal switch before anything else in the dungeon and hit it, like before you pick up a single key or whatever. It's not necessarily likely, but it's possible. Mm-hmm. But then to get to the block, it's like hidden behind like at least 4 key blocks or maybe 5, depending on how you go. So I love that it's like they're completely separated in your progression of the dungeon, not to mention all the other things mixed in together. So that is a really cool move. Like you said, you wouldn't there's no way you would have seen the blocks. Yeah,
exactly. You couldn't have gotten there and been like, oh, it's not. Yeah, you just wouldn't have seen it at that point once you see the crystal switch, most likely.
Yeah, that the underground or the overworld part is really cool. Like that's we've seen that in this game, really not that much. There's just like the one part of Face Shrine where it's just like a chest. But yeah, I think we've seen it a little bit more in A Link to the Past, and I think it gets a little bit more advanced in that game, which makes sense. This is a slightly more simple game, but I think it was really cool in this one because they added that warp spot to it, so you could theoretically have an overworld warp that puts you like right in the middle of a dungeon, basically.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And that's actually the fact that you can exit to the overworld in this dungeon. I didn't make the connection until last time that's also something that you can do in Turtle Rock in A Link to the Past. And also in A Link Between Worlds. It doesn't bring you to like a separate pathway, but you can exit the dungeon in that game too. So that's kind of neat.
I found that very useful in A Link to the Past, especially kind of in Skull Woods too, because you could use the mirror and like warp back to the entrance to the post the second part of that dungeon, the lead up to the boss. And I found that, and with Turtle Rock, you don't get a permanent warp like in Link's Awakening, but this could be useful too, where if you need to like recharge, get some more potion or something like that, you could always leave and then have some of your progress saved in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's cool.
That is cool.
And that was like a nice little, I like the little puzzle of leaving and then coming back up top to fight the Dodongos from above.
Yeah, that's a neat little puzzle that you have to beat them to get the reward for defeating them. You need to defeat them from up there. I think that's a really interesting little puzzle.
It's a little obnoxious to try and get them, but I do like that it makes the fight a little bit different. Yeah, that's kind of fun.
It's a little extra layer of challenge that you gotta throw it from afar rather than just place it right in front of their mouth.
Yeah, and so with them, and you mentioned other mini bosses return. I think it's really cool to kind of have them. It's like you're in the last dungeon now, and it's like there's a lot of like gauntlets of mini bosses with the Rolling Bones, the Hynix, the Smasher or whatever. Yeah. Like I think it's cool to see some of these guys come back.
Yeah, that's actually something I didn't really appreciate until noticing it on this time through. That this isn't usually when we see that, it's in like the final dungeon, which is usually like Ganon's castle or Hyrule Castle or something like that. This isn't really like this is the last dungeon of the game, but it's still kind of just regular level 8. So it's nice to see it using those techniques, and I like the fact that it brings back all these mini bosses rather than bringing back a bunch of bosses. Because there's, let me do a quick count right now. There's 1, 2, 3 if you count Dodongo snakes.
Oh yeah.
4, 5, 6. There are 6 mini bosses in this dungeon.
Wow, I can't even remember them all. Actually,
it's the, I don't remember his name. The guy that you fight in Angler's Tunnel, the squid guy.
Oh right, yeah. Cue Ball.
Yeah, Cue Ball. He's blocking the boss key, and then
that's cool too.
Hinox is in the path to the left, and then Rolling Bones is also at the end of that path.
Right.
All the way on the bottom right is Smasher. And then top right, it's Dodongo Snakes and Blano.
Yeah, and you've got I guess this isn't like a big, this isn't like a mini boss necessarily, but you've got the Vire added in there to a couple spots, which is kind of a nice addition. Like we've talked before about how it's cool how they'll save some enemies for the end,
Mm-hmm. And they feel right at home in this dungeon too, because it's like, aside from them being red, it's like they shoot little fireball things or whatever, and I feel like they fit really well in this like cavernous, fiery dungeon.
Well, it's like we're talking about what's the first thing you see. It's like you walk in and then like there's just one of those guys. Yeah. It's like, holy shit.
Yep.
Yeah, I like them a lot. That was a good point you made about like this kind of walks the line between being like the final challenge dungeon as well as like its own sort of dungeon. It's not like Ganon's Tower where it's like really bringing in all these disparate puzzle elements and mixing them together, mostly because a lot of the puzzle elements of this game are pretty simplistic, so it's there's not too many extra things you can do, but it does a thing that's, I think you think of more associated with a individual dungeon, which it kind of has a couple of its own little gimmicks. Like it's got that little like lava platform maker thing, which is kind of fun. It's not like it's not like mind blowing, but I kind of like doing the little puzzles where you fill in the floor and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's satisfying.
And that one room where you push it to go different directions, like that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I just think that's neat that this is. I feel like this very much is its own dungeon. This is its own 8th dungeon, unique, separate from other dungeons, but because it's the last one in a game that doesn't really have like a big final dungeon, it kind of picks up the mantle by being like, all right, let's put all these mini bosses back in here to kind of, it's kind of like because this is a theme that we see a lot in The Legend of Zelda, especially moving forward, is a lot of final dungeons will be kind of like greatest hits dungeons. And the way that they accomplish that in this, it's like, all right, well, let's bring back all these cool little mini bosses. But it still maintains its own persona.
Mm-hmm. the way, yeah, because I feel like we get into later games and like the puzzles become very like we've talked about how this game introduced like the items as like creating more individual puzzles. But overall, I sort of said it earlier, was like this feels like an extension of the progression with all the other dungeons. Like I think like that stays true here, where it feels like a final test of your like navigational knowledge that you picked up from all the other dungeons.
Big time, yeah.
Like I really felt that way playing this again, and like especially in the remake, like marking on the map, I was marking, you know, where the staircases go and stuff like that. So that's where it's really like a final challenge, and that's been a similar thread throughout all the dungeons.
Yeah,
it can't have a thing like in the later ones where it's like now you do, like you just couldn't have a section in this, I think, or I don't think it would be as good if it's like here's the Key Cavern section where you're using the Pegasus boots and stuff like that. I don't think that would be very fun, honestly.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think the fact that this final dungeon is the natural progression of kind of dungeon exploration in the game in general, I think that's kind of partially attributed to the fact that aside from, I think Eagle's Tower is the only one, pretty much every dungeon in this game takes place on one floor. Like not if you don't count
definitely.
like the underground passageways, which just connect you to a different spot. They're all just on one floor, so it really is a matter of memorizing, you know, how the rooms link to one another and how you need to get to the important parts of the dungeon. And I think this is really cool for that too, because just its layout, it's supposed to be a giant turtle, and in nature it's pretty symmetrical. So it's like each corner pretty much has an important thing that you need to get, and then the boss is like in the head.
Yeah, true. That's actually a pretty good point. Yeah. It works out really well that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm looking at that. It is kind of like easy to sort of remember, like, okay, like this stuff, you know, I've been to this part of the dungeon, like this corner and this corner and this corner, and then you sort of have that middle area where it like separates into different ways, you know?
Yeah, and that's kind of something that's part of the reason that while I really like the challenge in navigation that level 9 offers, I feel like it's a little bit more arbitrary because it just kind of feels like a giant circle pretty much. Like there aren't a ton of memorable landmarks, and to get to the important parts of the dungeon, you really need to use like multiple passageways and stuff and really know. Especially like if you die, if you go back to the beginning of the dungeon, it's like, oh geez, how did I get there again? Whereas in this, say you go up and you're fighting Cue Ball and you know that there's something important behind there. If you die, it's like, all right, I just got to go back up to that top left corner.
Yeah, and like the things you do to get there are a little bit memorable. It's like it like that, for example, would be like, okay, I got to go up. It's not like I go up, left, right, staircase. It's like you're like, okay, I go up and then I move like that lava block, which goes to the staircase, which puts me right out there. You know, so like you mentioned like the landmarks. It's not just the landmarks, but like what you're doing in the room makes it a little bit more memorable. Or like, oh, that's the room with like the crystal switch or whatever. You know?
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot. It's easier to keep track of, you know, the important parts of the dungeon, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay, final couple extra things. I guess there's Blano. He's a cool mini boss. I don't know. I don't really have much to say about him.
He can be frustrating, but he's fun.
Yeah, does it happen in the remake too? Can he punch you? I know he can punch you back to the beginning.
Really?
In the original, he can. Yeah, he can punch you all the way back to the entrance if he hits you with one of those big wind-ups. But I got hit with one in the remake I was playing, and it didn't happen. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure the status of that, but you've got him and you've got that room with like the little portal that can suck you in, and those both send you back to the beginning. So like there's like kind of that perilous aspect of it too, where you're like, oh boy, I gotta go through this area again type of thing. But yeah, I like Blano. We'll see him again and it'll be more interesting to talk about, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, Bueno. And then, okay, we got the dungeon item, which is cool. It's definitely cool. It's, to me, it's a good like end of the game item, because there's not many places you actually use it in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I always find it cool when it's like you just kind of get this like really neat kind of item right at the end.
Yeah, it is. It's fun to use, and I definitely do like. There's only really the two passageways filled with ice. The way that they make you use it to think about, like, all right, which ice blocks am I going to get rid of so that I can progress? I think that's a really neat way of using it. I just wish there was a little bit more, because you only get those two passageways, and that's, there's some
fun
torches
puzzle,
you can light, but other than that, that's
the
pretty
torches.
much it.
Yeah, definitely. And like a later Zelda would probably have like you get it earlier, and then like there's more puzzles with it. But I think it's pretty appropriate in this dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and like I said, it's one of those things where it's like you immediately know where to go because you saw the ice right in the beginning. Theoretically, like it's pretty likely you'd encounter that, and it's like, I don't know. It's pretty obvious that you're not going to be able to get through that without some fire.
Yeah, and that's something too that, like, even just the placement of those stairways that lead to the ice passages, they're slightly lower, but they're relatively central in the dungeon layout. So wherever you are, it's not going to take you a ton of time to get back to that central area and then go up those staircases.
Yeah, especially just play that song, fly right back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That'll save you some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a cool item. It looks cool in general too, and it feels good when you get it. Like, you feel powerful, especially if you go right back to the beginning and you throw it at that fire and just light them on fire.
Yeah.
It's pretty satisfying, but it's ultimately very usable on the boss, the Nightmare. Hothead is his name. Which I don't know how to describe this guy. I guess he's just a hothead.
Yeah, he's like a fireball head, and then once the fire's gone, I don't know how to explain his head without the fire. It looks like almost like a clown head with horns or something.
He's very clownish, yeah. I don't know. Not a great fight, I don't think.
No, it's not.
But he's cool.
It could be better. It's still. It's not super boring, but there's definitely the fact that it's just like, hey, that item you got, just use that and just keep hitting them. You don't really have to move that much.
Yeah, I think at least the boss fights that were like not very good in DX and the original, like, they at least make a bit more to them. Like in this one, like in this fight, for example, in DX, like, I don't even move. In this, I feel like you're bound to at least get knocked around a little bit, but it's still not hard.
No. I always found it weird conceptually too that he's a head of fire jumping in and out of lava. And the way that you beat him is using the magic rod, which lights stuff on fire. That always...
Fight fire with fire.
Yeah, I guess. That always kind of caused a little disconnect to me, but...
Fair enough. One little bit I like about him is, like, all these characters have, like, the nice little dialogue, and, like, some of them will, like, have little tags to their dialogue. His, I don't know how it would be vocalized, but it says crackle. It's like, okay, apparently does he say crackle, or does he make a crackling noise? I don't understand.
I don't know. It's up in the air there.
But I like his final plea. He says, why did you come here? If it weren't for you, nothing would have to change. You cannot wake the windfish. Remember, you too are in the dream.
Yeah.
Which we've kind of been getting that from all the bosses, but it's like a great final plea.
Yeah, the bosses, they've definitely been, laying it on, and it's been ramping up every dungeon.
Real thick.
Yeah, by the end you're just like, oh jeez, man.
And then we get the thunder drum, which is cool.
That's cool.
I like the little thunder drum too.
Probably one of my favorite instruments of the Sirens.
So that's the dungeon, but maybe before we rank them, we can we could talk about just like the rest of the game, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because okay, we didn't want to include. I don't think it would be fair to rank the Windfish's egg on the list. I don't really think of it as a dungeon. I don't know about you.
No, not really. It's just a passageway.
I do think you might go there. I kind of like it turns you on your head. Like you might go there expecting something, and then it's like it's very strange. I kind of like that element about it, but to me, it's like I guess you could throw it on. I think contextually in the game, it's really cool. Like I think it's a nice tight little game, and I like that you have all these dungeons that build off of each other, and then all the major stuff you do in the overworld, which is like the trading sequence, also leads to the end of the game too. You know, like the main objective, with a side thing too, which is kind of cool. So I think, you know, if you were to rank it, if I was to rank it, I would like also consider the fact that it's like there's like it's the end game of the trading sequence in a way too. So yeah, a lot of pros about it, but I think it's just not really like fair to throw this one on the list.
So I agree. But something, too, that I really like is that to get to... Wait a minute. Yeah, to get to the actual dungeon room, you gotta, like, jump down a pit. I don't know why, conceptually, that's just so cool to me. Because that's such a tried and true, like, there is no going back. Like, you can't jump back out of that pit.
Right.
Like, you go in there, you're not coming out unless you do what you went there to do.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I love the scene where you go up there and you play... You know, you play the song and you get all the instruments that you've collected, which feels really satisfying. Mm-hmm. Like, I really love the instruments in this game. I don't know how you feel about them.
I definitely do. And that's the version of Ballad of the Windfish that it plays with all those 8 instruments is one of my favorites. I love seeing each of them pop up, and then you almost like hear each one, you know, leading up at the end of every dungeon. It does a little thing where it plays a little jingle from that instrument, almost as if you're hearing its part in the Ballad of the Windfish, and then being able to hear them all collectively play the song, that's just super satisfying.
Right. We mentioned in our previous recording, like, the idea of, like, this compared to, like, it feels like an update, almost, of the original Legend of Zelda, but, like, they put such a unique spin on it with, like, you know, the references to the previous games, but then also like the Mario games and stuff like that. And this makes me think of, like collecting the bits of the Triforce. But in this, it's like they give them all their own like distinct feeling, and it like really, to me, makes it feel even more special than like, I get why they did it in the original. I'm not opposed to the Triforce or anything, but like, you know, there's just something extra about that makes it feel more like I just connect to it a lot more.
Well, you know, it's still functionally a MacGuffin in the exact same way that, you know, the shards of the Triforce or the crystals in Zelda 2 or the pendants and crystals / maidens in A Link to the Past. It functions exactly the same as those in that you just need to get a bunch of them so that you can do a thing. But these feel a lot less like MacGuffins because each one is its own instrument, and then the instruments play a song at the end. Like, conceptually, they do lead up to something, so it doesn't feel like, oh, you got the next gem that's gonna do something, you know, arbitrary at the end. You're getting these instruments so that you can play these instruments, which serves a purpose, you know?
Yeah, that's a great way of saying that for sure. So you get in there, you know, and you go, there's like the whole like labyrinth you go through, which is cool. But then this boss fight I actually think is a pretty neat one. It's definitely not difficult, I don't think, but it's a good cap to the end of the game. I think it's one of my favorite final bosses so far. I think mechanically Ganon, I like Ganon and A Link to the Past more, but conceptually I love this one a lot more.
Yeah, just fighting like it's basically just the nightmare. That's pretty much what you're fighting, and there is an interesting something that you pointed out last time we were recording is that like conceptually you're fighting nightmares within a dream, but it manifests in things that are personal to Link. Like, it manifests as Ganon at one point, and it's like, how would the Windfish know about that? And the fact that, I don't know if this is just in the remake or if it's in the DX version too, but like, the nightmare comes like from your shadow.
From within Link, yeah. And yeah, I mentioned like there's all these little like I love the story of this game. It's very simplistic, but it's not like overt in any of this stuff, and it's kind of just there for, it's like mostly mood. It's mostly like tone and mood, and then you kind of get out of it what it is. And I think a lot of people, I said this to you already, but a lot of people kind of want to like extract like more from it in terms of plot, you know what I mean? But really, like, the game is actually very upfront about what it's about, and then it's like a slow build and slow build of that tension and like slow reveal. But it's not like any like big like plot twists and anything like that.
Yeah.
And so I love this idea of when you first get there, it's just got all these tidbits, and when you first show up on the island, the owl says like, oh, no wonder like the monsters have started to get more fierce. So I don't necessarily know if it's like, you know, Link like created this world or anything, but I like it. Almost feels like he's inextricable from it. And it also feels like the player is too, because you're seeing stuff that only we would know about, you know, like, and they make reference to Mario games and like the Yoshi popping up in all these games. So it's like I feel like Link is like seeing the Windfish's dream and like stuff from his past manifest in it, and then we're seeing stuff from our past,
from the real world
as a gamer,
that's manifesting in the game,
from other Zelda games, obviously like Link, but then the Mario games. And I don't know, I just think there's a lot of I think it's not just like an Easter egg, you know what I mean? I think there's some meaning to that.
It definitely feels a lot less like this is entirely just the Windfish's dream, everything was this way, and then Link is just a visitor who happens to be there. It feels a lot more like things that are happening and the way that things are a lot more related to Link. Like, I think it's a lot more than he's just a visitor. He's influencing it in some way. And I do think that is a really neat comparison that you're saying, like the Windfish is to Link what this game is to us, almost. Like, we're the outsiders that are looking into this game world, but there are things in this game world that only make sense relative to us, the player. Like you said, like Kirby and Yoshi and Mario references and stuff, and that's just really cool. Unless they're trying to tell us that the Windfish is a big Mario fan. I don't know. I don't know what the implications of that are.
This game hits harder for me in that way too, because now I'm nostalgic about it, you know? Mm-hmm. And I am the nostalgic ghost. I'm going in to the remake and going, wow,
nostalgia.
So much has
unchanged.
Like, literally, all the blocks are all in the same place. Like, okay, they made it so I can jump down here, but overall, I'm looking around this game from my childhood and going, oh wow, take me to my grave.
It's very
but
true.
And that's what I like about that and other little things, is that they're just kind of like, it's just kind of like got this whole sense of oneness to it, where it is like, there isn't a lot like that doesn't tie into like an overall plot thing. It just is like another like minor thought that they threw in there about an element about like nostalgia and the past, similar to like you've got this element of like Marin, who's like this idea of like wanting to escape and, you know, fly away basically, and go your own way. Like that's what I get from this, is that it's just kind of like thoughts on hopes and dreams and like reality, you know?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that you're saying it's not, you know, as a plot, there's nothing overly complex about it. They're not doing anything super crazy, but there are these themes that are present that I think it's natural to pick up on and kind of form your own interpretation. I think they were trying to play with some ideas where they're not explicitly trying to pull off some crazy story thing, but they're just making you think a little bit.
Yeah.
And
that ties into their goal of making the game was they're trying to bring that experience of Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past to a small screen, and I think there's quotes you can find where they're like, we're getting experimental with it because it's handheld, and they said some quote about like, we're almost making a parody of Zelda.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So even I don't know how intentional a lot of that stuff is. A lot of it could just be like, I don't know, you know, throw Mario in there. But
could be. But there's definitely stuff. I think there's definitely plenty of room to interpret it the way that you want to.
Yeah.
Which is a cool thing to see from a Zelda game, because usually it's not really like that. And personally, for me, like to bring Marin back into the picture, like before this, there has been a lot of build up with Marin throughout the entire game, where you have little moments with her, and you're supposed to sort of, at least definitely for me, feel this bond with her by the end. And you know, when you find out that she tried to basically wake up the windfish, it's like, what does that mean? Like, is she trying to do that for you or for her so that she can break free? And then I think, you know, the whole build up to the end of the game with the nightmares telling you like, oh, if you get rid of this, you're getting rid of everything. As in you're getting rid of all those townspeople. More importantly, you're getting rid of Marin, is I think was kind of supposed to be the big thing.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And that hits home for me every time I finish this game and Link wakes up in the sea. Whether or not I did the secret ending or whatever, where you see Marin's face in the sky, like I always get that feeling of like, not so much like, did you do the right thing? I think there is some of that in there, but I think the big takeaway for me is kind of like, even if physically that world that doesn't exist anymore, it doesn't mean your experience wasn't real. Like you can carry that with you, just like you can carry the memory of Marin with you or something.
Yeah, there's like that. It's that element of oneness I sort of was thinking of, like you're kind of wrapped up, like as a person, you're wrapped up with your hopes and your fears and all this type of thing. And there's the part that actually hits me in playing this is just that part when the windfish is like, let's awaken together, you know? Yeah. And it's sort of like, I'm not saying this game teaches you like valuable lessons that you take into your life, but it's just this element of meditating on these disparate elements of your life and then taking them and being like, let's move forward. And like, you have to exist as that, you know? Yeah. And it also, to me, and it just also represents too, like, the game world, you know, like, and I'm not saying like I wrap all my emotions up in a game, but there is that nostalgic element of it, of like, this world of the game exists while I'm there. And then when it doesn't when I'm not.
It's almost meta in that way of like Link leaving the world is like the player finishing the game. It's like, all right, that's okay. You're going to beat this game. Maybe you'll erase this save file, but that doesn't mean you didn't experience this, and that's fine. You can just finish it up and move on with your memories.
That's almost like when people start talking about like, is it a real world or is it a dream world, or like, did Link do the right thing or the wrong thing? It's like, I don't care. Like, I don't think that's,
to be honest,
that's not the question the game is actually proposing. Like, I think they actually kind of avoid that. Like, I do like the element of like them pleading with you not to destroy the world, but I don't like, I think there's a deeper meaning to it than like, did Link do a bad thing?
Yeah.
And for all the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah. Well, I think it's less of, grappling with destroying a physical place and more just the concept of like erasing it from some sort of reality could be conflicting to the player, especially if you've grown fond of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I definitely think that is in there, which is cool. Yeah, so, I mean, I guess we kind of covered all that stuff, but I like the last fight. I love the Windfish's design.
Yeah.
That's such a cool moment when you go up and you're just like in this weird ethereal area and talking to this whale with wings,
Yeah.
Verily, it be the nature of dreams to end.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's the game.
That's Link's Awakening.
I love the credits music.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I was just right when you started saying that, I was thinking like he's gonna say he likes the credits, and I love the credits.
Good credits. Yeah. So yeah, I guess with that we could probably rank our dungeons. I guess we didn't really talk about your ranking, but overall it looks like Link's Awakening kind of slotted in right with A Link to the Past for you, just like me.
Yep, definitely.
Is there any? I think we are kind of in agreement with a lot of the things. We, in a color dungeon, the earlier dungeons kind of mixed in. You had Face Shrine pretty low, which I understand. Mm-hmm. But then you had the standout ones up here, which I pretty much agree with. I was kind of surprised by how much I liked like Key Cavern and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Eagle's Tower is the most standout for you. I did a whole video where I talked about it, and I put it actually at number 1, but it was for me fighting with Ganon's Tower. I don't know if that was hard for you to rank or what.
I don't think so. I think I pretty easily put it below Ganon's Tower. It was more, for me, it was more of a struggle between Eagle's Tower and Skull Woods. And I ended up, I told you that they were almost neck and neck, because I think they both have really cool progressions. I think they both have really cool almost gimmicks. I think they're both very atmospheric, and they both have like cool bosses and stuff. What really set Eagle's Tower over Skull Woods for me was the Grim Creeper.
Okay,
every dungeon benefits from like a silly little mini boss fight or something, and I think the Grim Creeper is really fun. I like that there's somewhat of a through line in that like you fight him and like he's all mad about you killing his brothers, and then he comes back and is controlling the eagle. I think that's really cool. It's like a mini arc for him.
I should have sent you my video on it, because I guess I'll just repeat some of my thoughts on it for your sake. But like I put it at the top because I felt like Ganon's Tower, I think, defines, we both agreed, like what a final dungeon should be. Mm-hmm. And it's like the pinnacle of that. And the thing I liked about Eagle's Tower was that, to me, it felt like it moved the dungeons forward. Like it's kind of like innovative in a way that the other ones haven't been as much. Like Skull Woods does come close with the like leaving, entering and exiting. But this, just the whole idea of, and it's like mostly with how they use the crystal switches, but like the whole dungeon itself is actually completely non-linear. But there's not like much progression at all. I mentioned it in the video, but it kind of reminds me of a Divine Beast, where it's like you have these 4, the pillars are essentially these 4 terminals you have to access. There is a natural order, but you could do it in whatever order. And what sets it apart from a Divine Beast is the actual navigation to get to them is the trick, Yep. And so to me, this felt like they really got outside of the box with that dungeon and said, like, and basically showed like another way dungeons could be that isn't just picking the locks with the keys, you know?
Yeah.
Which is an aspect I love. I think we're going to see a lot of the lock and key style dungeons stay at the top of my list for a while, but you know, just this idea of the dungeon as a puzzle.
Exactly. Eagle's Tower really definitely drives that home. I think for me, probably the main reason I put Ganon's Tower above it is that like those dungeon defining overall big puzzles like that, they like the first few times it's like this is the coolest thing ever, but I think it starts to lose a little bit of its luster down the road. Like only if you've played the game you know, like a dozen times or something. And even then, like you can still appreciate it. But I think
I really do still. Yeah.
I think it was more just like Ganon's Tower for me is jam-packed. Every single room, there's some sort of puzzle or perilous enemies to fight or something to do. Whereas in Eagle's Tower, there are a few rooms where it's kind of just like an in-between room where there's some of the crystal switch blocks, especially like on the first floor.
That's fair.
Which like that's not a bad thing. You know, it's still my number 2 out of all the dungeons so far.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. It's especially because it services that bigger puzzle, you know. And there's also they include something that we saw in, say, like the Tower of Hera in A Link to the Past. Those like verticality puzzles, they include some of that in there too. And I think there's a little bit. Yeah. That's really creative. But I think, that's kind of why I have Eagle's Tower at number 2. But it's definitely the strongest in this game for me.
Okay, cool. Well, okay, then how about you tell us where you would put Turtle Rock? Because I'm kind of struggling with it myself. I don't even know if I'm fully decided yet.
Okay, so I was giving this some thought, and I was kind of stuck right around a certain area.
Okay.
Somewhere around the Skullwoods Thieves Town area for me. So it's probably going to end up like either 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that.
Is it definitively better, do you think, than Catfish's Maw?
I think so, yes. So this is something.
Catfish's Maw is an extremely tight dungeon, though.
It is. It is a very tight dungeon. But I think something that we brought up before is that, and I think Eagle's Tower is the exception because it does have one of those dungeon-defining puzzles, and it has the verticality aspect to it. I think every other dungeon in this game, they all take place on one floor, and the way that you progress through them progresses very naturally throughout the game in complexity. Mm-hmm. And I think Turtle Rock is the pinnacle of that.
I agree. Yeah.
So that's
strongly.
That's kind of my justification for putting it above Catfish's Maw. And then for me, it kind of I think I ended up deciding that I like Skull Woods a little bit better because
that's fair.
Similar to Eagle's Tower, it's got one of those dungeon defining. Those are some of the most memorable dungeons in The Legend of Zelda, are the ones that have those super cool, unique, like, I don't want to call them gimmicks because that has a bad connotation, but for all intents and purposes, like dungeon gimmicks. Like for Eagle's Tower, it's the 4 pillars. For Skull Woods, it's popping in and out of the overworld. So I think that's why I put Skull Woods above it. And then it kind of came down to Thieves Town, which I more appreciate for its place in the world of A Link to the Past and its atmosphere and the way that it functions as an actual structure in the world.
That is cool.
Versus Turtle Rock, which I just think is a really well designed dungeon and just a really good challenge.
Okay.
So it kind of just came down to choosing which one of those I value more, and I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I don't think I can definitively say I value one of those aspects more than the other, but I think where I'm going to put it, I think it's going to go right in between Skull Woods and Thieves Town.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's going to slide
That'll
into
give
my,
it a
my
nice
number 4.
mix in here.
Insert one.
Nice little mix.
Yeah. It's literally
That's fair.
Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, Link to the Past, Link's Awakening.
I love Skullwoods, actually. It's one of my favorites in A Link to the Past. It's my number 4 in A Link to the Past. But, it does stick with me a little bit more. Like, I could see it moving up my list, but I haven't determined yet if I feel like I'm allowed to move stuff.
Yeah.
But even...
Oh, yeah. Did you want to talk about that?
Oh, well, you did move stuff,
did.
Which is okay. That's okay. We don't have to go into the specifics, okay. But people will probably notice what's different.
I moved a couple things.
Yeah, which I get, because some stuff you sit with it long. Like, I try to play these and then, like, it changes even by the time I record. I'll make last minute changes. But then even after that, I think, yeah, like now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, maybe Skullwoods feels like, to me, at the end of this, it would be one I would want in the top 5. But even if I moved it up 1, it's going to get bumped to 6. So I'm like, is it really worth moving all these around? You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
the reason that I feel, you already kind of hit on it. The reason that I feel it's kind of okay to be a little bit more loosey-goosey with these rankings is because your opinion changes indefinitely always.
Yeah.
But
I don't want to negate,
especially one that's got one of those dungeon-defining, mind-bending spatial puzzles. That might be something where in the moment right after you do it, you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then like a couple weeks later, you look back and you're like, that was cool, but like it wasn't anything crazy. Like it wasn't overly complex or anything. It was just creative.
It's something I might do, but I'm like making a big deal about it because I feel like it's like, what's the point of doing the series otherwise? If I could just make this list and not tell you. But basically what I mean is like, I feel like I'm partially doing the series to document it. And so if I am going to make a change, I like want it to be like very like, I want to have like the receipt, and I want to have like, I want a paper trail. So I'm probably going to spend multiple videos talking about it and also maybe see what people say in the comments. And then like, maybe I'll do it. Yeah.
My vote is that it's fine as long as you like make note of it and explain why.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm with yours. It's more fine too, because we're not following you week to week, but I like having the second opinion here. Maybe we can mash our lists together at some point too. Okay. I don't know. I don't know if you've helped me decide where mine goes, because so to me, it actually, if you're looking at my list, I like this because it is a great fusion of Death Mountain from the original and Misery Mire. It sort of has these elements of this big sprawling dungeon.
Yep.
But then mixed with that flavor of Link's Awakening, where it's like a more specific knot or whatever it is you're trying to pick. Because with Misery Mire, it's more like the Link to the Past ones, where they're kind of big, loosey-goosey. There's a less of a structure.
Yeah.
And Link's Awakening adds a lot of the structure and creates a lot of the Zelda formula. And I value both of those. I love Misery Mire because I can just start going one way and just keep making forward progress basically forever, or like get spit back out in an area and just keep going another area with a bunch of keys. Whereas this, it's a little bit, it's kind of more like, I don't know, it's got a bit more of a rigid structure, but it creates, a slightly more interesting lock that you have to pick away at.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at, where it's like, it's comparable to that.
That makes sense. And then Misery Mire and this dungeon are very similar dungeons, I would say.
Exactly. And then there's like Catfishes. I think I'll probably end up with it above that, with above Misery Mire, but I also think a Catfish's Maw, it does have some strengths over it, where I said it's like, feels a little bit more tight. I think you get a lot more, similar to an Angler's Tunnel too, you get a lot more of like fun, or at least, interesting item usage after you get it. Whereas this, it's like a very specific area or 3 areas. Mm-hmm. Kind of similar to that Switch though, like the crystal switch I mentioned, where it's like very specific use in this dungeon with like a lot going on. So I think it is justifiable in this dungeon.
Yeah.
So it's like, because to me they're kind of on a similar level. So it was like weighing it against those two dungeons. I still think that I can say I like it more than them, and so I'd had to have it in my top 3 spot. And I think it also does a good job of, again, being a final dungeon in this game that doesn't really have a final dungeon.
Yeah. I definitely like that it picks up that mantle. It didn't have to, but it did.
It did. So, yeah, it's top 3 for me. It's in your top 5. It's a very strong dungeon. Yeah, overall, we've seen, we said it was going to be like this, but like Link's Awakening is now slotting in to spots on the list, as opposed to like, the previous games were kind of stacking up on top of the earlier games.
Yeah.
And, next we're going to Ocarina of Time next, and I think that's going to persist. What do you think?
Yeah.
What's your prediction?
For me personally, it's definitely gonna still mix in with these, because there are plenty in that dungeon that I'm like, okay, that's fine, and then there are multiple where I'm like, this is top notch. This is a top notch dungeon. Something that I think I said last time, and I'm gonna reiterate this time, is that for me, I think for the most part, the bar is gonna be A Link to the Past and up. Like, I feel like it's going to be... It might happen a couple times, but I feel like for the most part, for most games going forward, it will be a rare occasion when dungeons start to breach the Legend of Zelda Adventure of Link level for me.
Yeah, I think that might be true for me too. So, we'll see, because... Yeah, Ocarina I think mixes in there pretty well. Like, early prediction, I think Dodongo's Cavern is like a 3D Eastern Palace. So, I expect that to go like there. And then beyond Ocarina of Time, I think we'll see the Oracle games mix in nicely. That's again, I love the Link's Awakening style of dungeon, and I think they expand upon that, so I think we'll see those fitting in there in cool ways. So yeah, I can't see anything dipping in the next couple of games, which is like the next year or whatever. I can't see anything drastically dipping or rising above, which is good. I think now we've got real nice lists going on here.
Oh yeah.
All right, so yeah, well, okay, we went a little bit longer on this one, but I feel like there was just a lot more to talk about. And I like talking about the story. I think we're going to cool off on that a little bit. I liked highlighting it because I think Link's Awakening story doesn't get the right sort of credit, if that makes sense. I like that it introduced kind of a more overarching story into the series, and so I wanted to get it out there. But from now on, like, the dungeons are more inextricable from the story, so we'll end up talking about the story elements as we go along, but I'm not gonna like be reading dialogue or anything. So but I wanted to get the story and stuff out there. I'm gonna take probably another little break, probably another week or maybe even 2. I don't know, I might need to recharge my batteries. But keep following the channel. And it's been great. I don't know if you followed the comments here, Corey, but there's a lot of really smart people following this, actually. Nice. Who have a lot of who know a lot more about this game than either of us do, actually. So keep giving us your knowledge, because it's very enlightening.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, Corey, thanks again for hanging out on this longer one. This was a lot of fun, even though we did it twice.
Yeah, absolutely glad to be here. That's why I went so long. We had to make up for the lost one.
Maybe we did it 1.5 times.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right, so yeah, everybody go check out the Player Power podcast. I've been on there, and it was a lot of fun to be on there, ranking N64 games and talking about Zelda art styles. So go check that out. Check out their season finale. And yeah, I guess I'll see everybody in season 5, Ocarina of Time. Bye-bye.
Woohoo.